Today's video is brought to you by Shells.com.
Shells is a virtual desktop solution that allows you to have your very own desktop computer in the cloud. Once you set up your account, you'll be able to access your virtual desktop through your web browser or via their mobile and desktop apps. Shells offers some great distributions too, such as Ubuntu, Manjaro, Mint, OpenSUSE, MX, and others. And they work directly with the community and distro developers to make their service seamless. In fact, they also offer Windows and Android desktops as well, so you could test out apps for other platforms without wasting valuable RAM by running a virtual machine. They have 20 operating system options available and counting. And pricing is simple. Shells offers transparent, cost-effective pricing, and key features such as automatic backups are included. Once you set up your account, you can get your very own cloud desktop running in less than 5 minutes. No one does it faster. And you can upgrade at any time to get more power in seconds. Definitely check out Shells.com via the URL on the screen, which is also linked in the description below. Shells is awesome.
Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, we're going to talk about docking stations. And I have to say, I love docking stations. They're very convenient. They allow you to essentially turn your notebook or laptop into a desktop when you're not on the go. Now, I would love it if I was creating a video that was just telling you why I love docking stations, all the reasons, and then finishing the video with my recommended list of docking stations that you can purchase. But unfortunately, that's not the video that I'm going to be creating today, because quite frankly, the whole situation around docking stations is a pain in the So why are docking stations such a pain? The thing is, we live in a plug-and-play world. If you buy a device, a peripheral device from a computer store, and your computer has the correct port, then you could be reasonably sure that that particular product is going to act as advertised. I mean, if you buy a USB keyboard, for example, and your computer has a USB port, it's simple. Plug it in, you could use it as a keyboard. If you purchase a display that has an HDMI port, and your computer has an HDMI port, it's a one-to-one match. It's going to act as a display. The peripheral will act as advertised. But the problem with docking stations is that they're not that simple, unfortunately. Now, when I say docking station, I'm mainly referring to USB Type-C docks, which are the most common dock that you could buy nowadays. And if your machine has a USB Type-C port and you buy a USB Type-C dock, you might be under the impression that all the features that are advertised on the box for that docking station will work as advertised. But unfortunately, the reality is not that. We live in a world nowadays where you could buy a USB Type-C dock that advertises something like an HDMI port, for example, and you could plug it into your computer, you could plug in a monitor, and you might not actually get anything on your display at all other than a message that says no signal. Perhaps the docking station even advertises power delivery, the ability for it to essentially pass power through the docking station to your notebook to keep it charged. But that might not work. So what I'm going to do in this video is talk to you guys about docking stations, but in particular, the challenges, if nothing else, give you guys the information that you need in order to make a more informed purchase. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about individual docking stations that I have used personally that have worked fine for me. So at this point, I want to basically clarify what I am talking about and what I'm not talking about when it comes to docking stations. The short answer is that I'm talking about USB Type-C docking stations. Other types of docking stations do exist. Some of them are even proprietary, but I'm not talking about those in this video. But I do feel like I need to talk about them a little bit just to kind of let you guys know what the difference is. The subject of a docking station is not new. We've had them for quite some time now. Some business class notebooks, for example, actually have a port replicator on the bottom, and then your notebook essentially just sets into that docking station or connects to it physically, and that's called a port replicator, but also known as a docking station as well. And if your notebook actually has a port for a proper port replicator, you should probably buy that instead. I mean, generally speaking, you can find them for about $15 to $30 US on eBay. So if your notebook has a port for that, it's probably the best bet. Nowadays, notebooks aren't really manufactured with port replicator ports anymore, at least as far as I know. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about USB Type-C docks, which is actually what's replaced port replicators as we used to know them. So going forward, if I mention the terms dock or docking station for the remainder of the video, just assume that I'm talking about a USB Type-C dock, which is generally what you should go with. There's other types of docking stations out there, but USB Type-C docks, that's what you should go with because they're the most common. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what kind of software might I need to install in order to make a docking station work? Will I need to install a driver, maybe some sort of software? What will I need in that regard? And the answer is nothing. There's no software to install. There's no driver that's required. Docking stations use standards, and all operating systems actually support docking stations out of the box with no added software being required. If you do see a docking station out there that you're thinking of purchasing, and it does require the installation of a driver or some kind of software, don't buy it. There's absolutely no excuse, literally zero excuse, for any company out there to enforce any kind of software for a docking station. Again, they use standards, so software and drivers, that's really not necessary. One of the most common offenders here is display link. You'll often see this when you go to Google docking stations, for example. You'll see display link listed on the technology page or product page for that particular dock, and if you see that, don't buy it. If you did just buy a docking station and it's a display link docking station, return it. The reason why I say that is twofold. One, again, software isn't necessary. And the other reason why I don't like display link docking stations is because the software that they do require is finicky, especially on Linux. I mean, it works most of the time, but they only support, a few distributions, basically Ubuntu LTS. I mean, God forbid you're using anything else other than that. You may or may not get it to work. But what's worse is that even if you do get it to work, I've seen it just abruptly stop working, and I've had to do some kind of combination of removing software, re-adding software, playing around with it, trying different USB ports. Eventually, it'll start working again, then it'll stop. It's just horrendous. Don't buy display link. And return it if you did buy one already. Avoid display link and make sure you search for display link on the product page to make sure that that's not there, that's not present, that it doesn't use that technology, and you should be fine. There's dozens of docking stations out there, especially on Amazon, that don't use display link, so finding a docking station that doesn't use display link is not hard at all. So now what I'm going to do is talk about the individual features of docking stations and what's required to make them work. And the first feature that I'm going to talk about is the concept of a USB hub. Most of the time, these USB-C docks are USB hubs. I mean, that's what they are. They have other ports as well, which is why we classify them differently from, a standard USB hub versus a docking station, because a USB hub isn't going to have a, mini display port or something like that. That's something that a docking station is going to generally have. But all of these docking stations have at least one USB port, and most of the time, they'll have like 2 or 3. So they'll act as a USB hub, which is pretty cool. The ability for such a dock to act as a hub for USB, that's a no-brainer. So that's actually the only feature that works on everything. Any dock you buy, it should work as a USB hub. So if that's all you wanted a docking station for, you can actually stop watching the video right here. But honestly, if all you wanted was a USB hub, you should probably buy a USB hub because, well, they're cheaper than docking stations for the most part. But if nothing else, the first feature that I'm going to mention when it comes to docking stations is for them to be able to act as USB hubs. And honestly, that's easy. They just work. It works on everything. We're good there. So we could just move on. Now, let's talk about display. Specifically, the ability to connect a display to a docking station. And this is going to be the number one reason why most people actually buy a docking station. The ability to connect a display to a docking station is literally what allows you to essentially turn your notebook into a desktop when you're not on the go. Because, well, you connect your keyboard, your mouse, and your display to the docking station, and then you connect the docking station to your notebook, and now it's a desktop. But unfortunately, this is the first feature that is not universal, that not all notebooks can do. Now, you would think, as a consumer, that if you buy a USB Type-C dock, and you plug it into a USB Type-C port, and that dock has an HDMI port or a display port on it, that it's going to allow you to view, your computer on that display. But honestly, not always. So what makes the difference then? Actually, what makes the difference is whether or not your computer actually carries DisplayPort over USB Type-C. And the thing is, some computers do, some computers don't. Now, if you look at your notebook, you might see a DisplayPort icon next to a USB Type-C port. Perhaps you have more than one USB-C port on your computer. Maybe only one of those ports actually has a DisplayPort icon next to it. If that's the case, then that one USB Type-C port is probably the one that allows you to use a dock with an HDMI or DisplayPort on it because it carries display signals over USB Type-C. Some notebooks, actually all of the USB Type-C ports will carry display, which is pretty cool, but not all of them do. And worse, you can't even tell whether or not your computer supports DisplayPort by actually looking at the USB Type-C port. There might not be an icon, and just because there's not an icon doesn't mean it's not able to do that. It just means that either, well, it can't do that, or the manufacturer decided that they're not going to bother and put an icon next to that port. There's no consistency here. And that's going to be the theme through the rest of the video, the lack of consistency. That's the main problem. I mean, if it was a rule that every notebook manufacturer had to include some kind of a icon or designation next to a port, if it supported, something like display, that would be great because everybody would know. You just look at your computer, it has that icon next to the port, okay, you're good, you could go ahead and buy a dock. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. So what you actually have to do, unfortunately, is check the specification or the spec sheet, product page, whatever for your computer, and find out which USB Type-C ports, if any, support display. And that alone determines whether or not you can use a dock with DisplayPort or HDMI on that computer, because again, your computer has to carry display over USB Type-C. If it doesn't do that, then, well, there you go. You can't actually use that feature. Another thing to be careful about is that some computers actually have BIOS settings that disable the ability for display over USB Type-C by default. I have no idea why any manufacturer at all would actually want you to enable a BIOS setting just to enjoy that feature, but it is what it is. So if it doesn't work for you, you could check the BIOS settings, but again, we run into a standards issue. I mean, what's it going to be called in the BIOS? I have no idea what the option is going to be called because it's different. Again, we have a lack of standardization, which is our main problem. The next feature that I want to talk about is power delivery. With power delivery, you can actually connect a USB Type-C charger to your docking station, plug the docking station into your computer, and your computer will actually charge over USB Type-C. And that's great because if that's the case, then you can essentially attach your dock, just one cable, and that charges your computer, gives you HDMI or DisplayPort, connects your USB keyboard and mouse, all the things. And that's great. Just connecting one cable for all the things, that's the ultimate goal. But if your computer doesn't support power delivery over USB Type-C, then you will not be able to charge your computer over USB Type-C, even if the docking station advertises that it has that ability. And here we run into the same issue that I mentioned earlier about standardization when I was talking about HDMI and DisplayPort. Some computers actually will have a designation or icon next to a USB Type-C port that supports power delivery. Not all computers do. So again, you might not have a designation on any of your USB Type-C ports. That doesn't mean that you can't charge your computer over USB Type-C. It might mean that, but it also might mean that your manufacturer just didn't bother to put an icon next to it. I mean, think about it. When it comes to USB 3.0, a lot of people will say, look for the blue USB port, while some manufacturers color that port black as well. I mean, It seems like computer manufacturers can't be bothered to standardize anything, which again is our problem. However, there's another potential challenge that you might face. Even if your computer supports power delivery and your dock supports power delivery, if you attach a power cable to the dock that provides less power in watts than your computer actually needs in order to stay charged, it may not actually offer much benefit. In addition, even if you attach a charger that supplies the appropriate wattage and power, the docking station itself might not be able to handle that same number of watts, which means the docking station might be sending less power to your laptop than what the charger itself is providing. So in that case, you have to make sure that the docking station you're thinking of purchasing supports the wattage that's required to charge your computer. And that's why you can have a docking station that's made for a 13-inch MacBook Pro that can keep it charged no problem, but that same dock might not be able to charge a 15-inch MacBook Pro that has a power-hungry GPU. In that situation, you might actually notice that your battery is draining, even though your computer supports power delivery. And if that's the case, then you're still going to need to attach a charger or buy a docking station that actually supplies the amount of power that you need to keep your computer charged. Sometimes you might actually have a laptop that supports power delivery, but no docking station seemingly supports the amount of power that's needed to keep it charged. A good example of this is my ThinkPad X1 Extreme, which is the laptop that I use for the majority of the videos, especially when I'm doing reviews of Linux distributions. And the thing is, none of the standard USB-C docks that I've been able to find supply enough power to keep that computer charged. There is, however, a docking station created by Lenovo themselves that will power the device over USB-C. It's actually a Thunderbolt dock. But the only reason why that works is because it provides more power than any other dock for the most part, and that's not common. And also, the Lenovo Thunderbolt 3 dock is extremely expensive. So in summary, if you want to take advantage of power delivery, the following must be the case. The notebook itself must be able to accept power via USB-C. The docking station must also support power delivery. The charger that you connect to the docking station must provide the same amount of watts that's required to charge the computer or greater. Also, the docking station itself must support sending the amount of watts that's required to charge the computer. Generally speaking, if you attach the USB-C charger that came with your notebook to the dock, then the charger part is taken care of. At that point, you only need to find out if the dock itself can pass through the same amount of power in watts that the computer needs in order to charge. Now the thing is, even if your computer doesn't support power delivery over USB-C, it's not the end of the world. If your computer supports display over USB Type-C, you can still use a dock, you just won't be able to charge your computer over USB Type-C, which is okay. Worst case scenario, that means you have to connect one more cable in addition to your docking station, which honestly, isn't as convenient, but it's still okay. It's doable. It's not the end of the world. You can get around that. If you have to plug in two cables, I think you could probably get by. But again, check the spec sheet for your computer to find out if it supports power delivery over USB Type-C. That's important. Now, another feature that I want to talk about is Ethernet. Ethernet is something that some docking stations actually have. It might not be as common, but some of them do have an Ethernet jack, and if they do, then if that works for you, you can actually connect an Ethernet cable and bypass Wi-Fi, which is always good to do because, let's be honest, wired Ethernet is always better than Wi-Fi. Now, the beauty of this is that an Ethernet jack on a USB Type-C dock is essentially the same thing as buying a USB 3.0 Ethernet adapter, so it should work for pretty much all of you. It's just that there might be some variance from one dock to another. You might not get 100% gigabit speeds depending on how the dock is manufactured, the speed of your USB port and things like that. But it should be better than Wi-Fi, so I guess it's better than nothing. And if nothing else, this is simple. If it has an Ethernet jack on it, it should actually work. There should be no problem getting that to work at all, which is great because, as I've discussed, other features around docking stations, well, they're not that easy. Now, let's talk about Thunderbolt. Here we are with another concept that needs more standards. The thing is, everything I mentioned is a standard, so you could argue that there's plenty of standards. There's too many standards. But there's really no standard, like I mentioned, when it comes to whether or not your computer is going to signify the features of your USB Type-C ports, because Thunderbolt is actually carried over USB Type-C as well. And simply having a USB-C port does not mean you have Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt determines how fast data can be transferred over that port, and it essentially gives you a direct connection potentially to the PCIe port of your computer or the PCIe bus, which means, well, you can get some major speeds off of Thunderbolt. But if you don't have Thunderbolt, well, you can't benefit from that at all. And this has really nothing to do with docking stations in general, because you could buy a Thunderbolt hard disk, for example, an external hard disk, and that's great. You could potentially benefit from the extra speeds. But, that's a hard drive. We're talking about docking stations here. If you have a Thunderbolt dock, then you can get some additional benefits, which include the possibility of having an external GPU. And that's awesome, because just think about it. You could have a notebook that has no GPU at all, basically an integrated GPU that can't handle high-end games, and then attach a Thunderbolt GPU dock to your computer, and then you could play those games, essentially turning your non-gaming computer into a gaming computer. I mean, how awesome would that be? But now we run into some other issues here, because again, if your computer doesn't actually have Thunderbolt on any of the USB Type-C ports, you can't really use a GPU dock at all, which sucks. But what's worse is that you could have Thunderbolt and you still might not be able to use a GPU dock, because there's different versions of Thunderbolt, 2, 3, and 4, for example, each supporting different speeds. So you could have a Thunderbolt port that's on the slower side, which means your GPU, well, your external GPU is not really going to benefit you all that much. Now, you have to understand what type of Thunderbolt you have, if any, on your computer. And you also have to understand how many lanes it has as well. So however many lanes you have determines how fast data can transfer over USB Type-C via Thunderbolt. So just keep that in mind. And that's a whole nother video of and by itself, because there's other complications here that you have to keep in mind. I might actually make another video about GPU docks in general if you guys want me to, because I think, again, that is probably a new video of and by itself. That being said, if you do have Thunderbolt on your computer and it's fast enough with the correct number of lanes, you could actually use a GPU dock. And they're not marketed as docking stations. They're marketed as, external GPUs, but they do actually have, docking stations that are advertised as GPU docks that have the GPU integrated, while we also have external GPU enclosures that you could purchase to actually fit a desktop GPU inside. And that's pretty much going to transform your non-gaming computer, if compatible, into a gaming computer, which is great. You'll always have slower speeds than when you connect that same GPU into an actual desktop, so there's going to be a little bit of a bandwidth limit there, but it's still pretty cool. But anyway, at this point, you should have all the basic understanding that you need when it comes to the fundamentals of docking stations and the features and what's required to make them work. So at this point, what I'd like to do is talk about a few different docking stations that I've used that I've had success with. My number one favorite docking station of all is the Pine Dock. And by Pine, I mean the same company that made the Pine Book, Pine Time, Pine Phone. They even have a soldering iron, believe it or not. They make a lot of different things. But their docking station is great. In fact, I reviewed it not that long ago, so check out that video if you want to learn more about that dock. But overall, I think it's the best. And some of the reasons why I like it so much is because it has an insane number of ports, basically everything you could ever want, and it doesn't seem to generate that much heat. It's very common for these USB-C docking stations to run extremely hot, sometimes to the point where it's uncomfortable to even touch them. Even though a lot of these docking stations are rated to run that hot, I still don't like it. The Pine Dock, in my experience, doesn't run hot at all. Also, the Pine Dock supports power delivery, so it's able to charge your computer if your computer is able to receive power from USB-C. So if you want to power your computer, then that box is checked. The only reason why I don't use it on a daily basis is because I have an ultra-wide display with a 5K resolution, and it's really hard to find a docking station that's going to work with a resolution like that. But as long as you don't have a crazy resolution, the Pine Dock is a great choice. Another docking station that I like is the Kingston Nucleum. It doesn't have as many ports as the Pine dock has, but it does have 2 USB-C ports, one of which supports power delivery. It has 2 USB Type-A ports that supports USB 3 transfer speeds. It has a built-in card reader and also an HDMI port. The only thing I don't like about it is that it doesn't have a built-in Ethernet jack, but if that isn't something that matters to you, then the Kingston Nucleum is actually a good choice. I mentioned the Thunderbolt 3 dock by Lenovo earlier, and I'm going to mention it again right now. The thing is, like I mentioned before, the Thunderbolt 3 dock is outrageously expensive. But if you have a laptop like the ThinkPad X1 Extreme that's very power hungry, then your choice of docking stations is going to be fairly limited, because not that many of them can provide the power that's required to charge a laptop that uses a lot of energy. This one actually does supply enough power to the ThinkPad X1 Extreme, keeping it charged and allowing me to use it as a desktop. And that's pretty cool. But you can actually use the Thunderbolt 3 dock with other computers as well. You don't have to have a Lenovo computer. I was able to use it with System 76 machines, I tried it with a MacBook, and it worked on all of them. So if you can afford it, the Thunderbolt 3 dock by Lenovo is actually a good choice, and if you have a power-hungry laptop, it might be your only choice. But even if you were to buy one used, the price is still a little bit up there. The cost can range anywhere from $150 to over $200. So it's definitely an investment. So I know that was a lot of information to go over in one video, but I wanted to make sure that you guys had all the knowledge that you need to make an informed decision if you're in the market for a docking station. If nothing else, I'll have a video that I can refer people back to because I get a lot of questions when I review laptops about which docking station is compatible, and it's my hope that this video will be helpful in pointing you in the right direction. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you in the next video.